Dan Marino, to me, was the greatest thrower of the football ever.
Dan Marino never won a title. It wasn't his fault.
I felt every situation you could as a quarterback in the league and played at the highest level, but I just didn't know what that felt like to walk off that field the last game and be that champion.
How could the most prolific passer of a generation be consistently remembered as the guy who
didn't win a Super Bowl?
All of his passing records, all of his trend setting, and all of his impact on the game overshadowed by a lack of team success. Adding insult to injury, the guy who overshadowed him was largely considered the best of their generation, primarily based on his team's postseason success, and not by his game-changing abilities as a passer. While Marino set passing records, Montana won championships, and the narratives surrounding the two were written about the winning, rather than their impact on the game. This is life, though, when you're one of the other guys in your generation.
You are a bad guy, but this does not mean you're a bad guy.
Welcome back to Unlikely Success. Like, comment, and if you're new to the channel, don't forget to subscribe. Today, we're going to talk about how Dan Marino became one of the other guys of his generation and how much surroundings matter when it comes to quarterback success. Let's start by setting the stage with some background on Dan Marino. Coming out of the University of Pittsburgh, Dan was seen as a picture-perfect pocket passer with a lightning-fast release, pinpoint accuracy, and arm strength that rivaled anyone who has ever thrown a football. He was clearly one of the top college prospects, but due to some unsubstantiated rumors and regression in his senior year, one of the most notable slides in NFL draft history would occur. Marino would go on to be selected 27th overall. He was even passed over by his hometown Pittsburgh Steelers. But when a player slides in the draft, it can become fuel to prove everyone wrong. And Dan's future coach, the legend Don Shula, would confirm this was exactly the case for his young QB when he said that the draft fall, quote, motivated Marino to show everybody else what a mistake they had made. Interesting side note here though, Dan Marino was the first ever draft pick in the USFL, taken by the Los Angeles Express. He would choose to join the Dolphins obviously, and after sitting the first 6 games of his rookie year, the young QB started revolutionizing the passing game. Marino set records for passer rating with a 96, received a Pro Bowl selection, made the All-Pro team, and threw 20 touchdowns to only 6 picks as a rookie.
Pretty good.
The team would lose his first playoff game to a 9-7 Seattle Seahawks, but what Dan was about to do was going to change the NFL. In his second season, he would set 6 passing records. That's right, 6. He threw for 48 touchdowns, nearly 5,100 yards, and won his lone MVP. After a 14-2 year, the team would avenge their loss to the Seahawks in the divisional round, beat the Steelers in the AFC Championship, where Marino set records for the most passing yards and touchdowns in a championship game, and make a Super Bowl appearance against what would become the guy of his generation. Dan and Joe would face off in the Super Bowl, or at least that's how storylines get phrased. But in actuality, Marino was up against the 49ers defense, a unit that would spend the next decade as a top 10 defensive group. And I would contend this is the side of the ball where the game was won, as they only allowed 16 points to the league's top offense from that season. It had to be disappointing in the moment, but it's even worse given that Dan never made it back.
I thought that we would be back in the Super Bowl, and it's been over a decade and we haven't been back.
Had he won the Super Bowl, would Dan be in every top 5 quarterback conversation? I mean, he's in my top 5, but what do you think? His lone moment in the NFL's biggest game was not a good one, and it's certainly the biggest blemish on Marino's stellar career. From 1985 to 1999, the Dolphins would have 2 top 10 defensive units.
2.
You serious?
They also had a below average running game. In fact, during Marino's career, he played with a single 1,000-yard rusher. Yes.
I said 1.
And this is during a time when rushing the ball was the emphasis for most offenses around the league. The Dolphins, though, well, they weren't one of those offenses. The team ranked higher than 15th in rushing twice during Dan's tenure as the starting quarterback. It was an offense centered around Marino, and luckily for them, he was good enough to carry them, as they made the playoffs 10 out of 17 seasons where he was the starter. And one of those has an asterisk, as Dan suffered an ACL injury just 5 games into 1993. This injury was a non-contact injury, but after years of sacks, the back half of his career would be riddled with issues. It was a shame too, because the 93 Dolphins had the look of a true Super Bowl contender. He would go on to miss parts of 3 of the last 6 seasons he played in Miami, and while I would never say mobility was his calling card, his ability to move in the pocket had always been a strength. But this became more limited during the latter half of his career. When it was all said and done, Dan had been an MVP, comeback player of the year, 5-time passing yards leader, 3-time passing touchdowns leader, the fastest quarterback to 100 touchdowns, the first quarterback to have 3 straight 30 touchdown seasons, the first quarterback to 50 and 60,000 passing yards, and the first QB to throw for 400 touchdowns.
Pretty good.
I almost forgot to mention this, but he was also a 10-time sack percentage leader, which basically means he was taking a lot of hits. It was an incredible passing career, but to this day, Dan holds one distinction that no one would want, and that is the quarterback with the most of all these passing stats without a Super Bowl ring. He had 9 other tries to get there, aside from the one that I mentioned earlier, and in quite a few of them, he lost to the team that represented the AFC in the Super Bowl. But the Dolphins were also blown out in most of their season-ending losses. I'm not willing to say that these were entirely due to the product of poor quarterback play. Some were. But any football fan knows that a team needs balance. A great passing attack can carry you so far, but few Super Bowl winners, if any, have been as unbalanced as the Dolphins were, year after year.
Oh, it's true.
It's damn true.
Now that we've covered most of the history Dan had with Miami, let's talk about how he stacks up with Montana. I want to start with this disclaimer. Joe Montana is an unquestionable all-time great, and the following is simply comparing him to another all-time great. With that being said, let's get into it. In the 80s, the 49ers were a dynasty, but we shouldn't forget about how good they were for the 90s. San Francisco had a top 10 defense every year Marino was in the league. They had a Hall of Fame coach, and in 1985, they drafted some guy named Jerry Rice. You've probably heard of that guy. The most passing yards Montana ever put up was 3,944. Marino put up more than this 8 times in his career. Yeah, 8. Joe threw for 30 touchdowns or more once. Marino, 4 times. When the 49ers moved to Steve Young after Montana's injury in 1991, they would go on to 3 more NFC championships, win a Super Bowl, and make the playoffs in 7 of the next 8 years. Sure, they had replaced him with a Hall of Famer, but the offense got better after Montana left. I just want to say again though, Montana is an all-time great, but my point is, he was surrounded by great talent and a great coaching staff. By comparison, the Miami Dolphins have won a single playoff game since Marino left in 1999. That's 1 playoff game in 25 years. They've had 9 winning records, and 4 of those came after 2020. When I say the surroundings were different, it cannot be understated. The other piece of this is impact. Dan Marino had the ideal throwing motion for young players. He's the way you would teach them how to throw. He was also a major part of Ace Ventura. And if that's not cool, I don't know what is. I mean, what movie did Joe Montana have? Sure, he has rings, but Laces Out is an all-time line.
Laces out.
Well, that was awkward.
Yes, it was.
Montana was cool under pressure, and he made big plays in big moments. But Dan changed the way offense was played. The passing offenses of today are not the product of Montana's impact. They are due to Marino revolutionizing the way offense could be played. Unfortunately, Dan also lived out the nightmares of trying to lead a one-dimensional team dependent on a superstar quarterback. Just to be clear, I want to say one more time, this is comparing 2 top 10 all-time QBs and not intended to take anything away from what Joe Montana accomplished. All of this being said, who do you think has more impact on today's game, Joe or Dan? In a team game, it's not all that fair to judge one position based on their team's success. but quarterbacks are consistently measured by their win totals. For Dan Marino, this means it kept him from being considered the greatest of all time. In my opinion, Dan, with a consistent top 5 defense, top 10 running game, and his ability, accomplishes at least similar things to what Montana did. And I think he does more. Whereas Joe, with an average to below average defense and a below average running game, never showed the skills to truly carry an offense because he was never asked to. I mean, literally, he never had to do it. His most elite trait was tied to his performance in the biggest moments, and that was how clutch he could be. But over a full season with lesser talent, Montana did not have the passing skills to accomplish what Marino did. Maybe that's just me though. What do you think? If you simply put Dan Marino on the 49ers and Joe Montana on the Dolphins, how different are their careers? This has been the Unlikely Success.
When Shannon Sharpe starts ripping quarterbacks who don't have Super Bowl rings.
I don't think he was ripping me personally. What did he say exactly?
He was just saying you got to win Super Bowl rings. I'm watching and all I wanted to do was have a camera on you going, I wonder what Dan is thinking. You know what, Shannon, you just want to throw a pass right in the chest and say, hey, shut up, okay? I'm over here.
That's with the media and everybody. I mean, everybody goes to that. But, if I played on some of the teams he played on, I'd have won Super Bowls too.